2 a.m. 48th floor. A city burning quiet 40 stories below. A man in a janitor's uniform stands motionless in the doorway of a darkened office. His cleaning cart is behind him. His phone is in his hand. On the desk in front of him, a woman asleep in a chair. 47 pages of bankruptcy documents fanned beneath her fingertips, and a monitor still glowing. Casting blue light across numbers he was never supposed to read. He reads them anyway. His hand tightens around the phone because what is on that screen is not a mistake, not a glitch, not background noise. It is a pattern, clean, deliberate. The kind that only makes sense if someone on the inside has been quietly destroying everything from within. He looks at the woman, he looks at the screen. 9 hours from now, she will sign her name and lose everything she built. Unless he does something no one will ever ask him to do. Night 1994. Dion Lattimore knew the number without thinking. The way a man knows how many steps from his front door to his car. The way a man knows which floorboard creaks and which one doesn't. He had counted every single shift since the first one. Not because the number mattered. Because counting was the only habit left from the person he used to be. He pushed the cleaning cart through the corridor on the 48th floor. The wheels made a low, steady hum against the marble. The lights overhead were dimmed to half power after 9 p.m. building policy. Something about energy conservation. Something nobody had ever explained to him directly. They never explained anything to him directly. He was the night shift. He was the man who disappeared before the real people arrived. 2:03 in the morning, the floor was empty. Always empty. The executives left by 7. Sometimes 6:30 if they had dinner plans. They moved through this building during daylight hours like they owned every molecule of air inside it. And then the sun went down, and the building became Dion's. Not in any way that mattered, but in the only way that was left to him. He stopped at the end of the corridor and looked out through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city below was still alive, headlights moving in long, slow lines. A few lit windows in the towers across the street. Somebody else working late. Somebody else who couldn't sleep. He stood there for maybe 4 seconds. Then he turned back to the cart and kept moving. He had learned not to look at the city too long. It had a way of making him remember things. 11 years. That was how long Dion Lattimore had spent inside systems. Not offices, not conference room, systems. The actual infrastructure that made companies function. Firewalls, network integrity protocols, penetration testing. He had built security architecture from the ground up for a data firm in Atlanta called Meridian Solutions. Mid-size company, 300 employees. Contracts with hospital networks and financial institutions across the Southeast. He had been good at it. Not just competent. Good. The kind of good where colleagues came to him with problems they couldn't name yet. The kind of good where he could look at a data pattern for 90 seconds and feel something wrong before he could explain what it was. That feeling had never failed him. Until the night it did. He didn't like to reconstruct that night in detail. He had done it enough times in the years since. He knew the sequence by heart. He had been running on force of sleep for 11 consecutive days. A major client migration. 2 team members out sick. His manager pushing for a faster rollout than the timeline allowed. Dion had flagged the risk. Twice, in writing. Both times he was told to keep moving, so he kept moving. And at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in November, he saw a warning flag in the system, small, unusual, but not alarming on its face. The kind of thing that on a normal day with a rested brain, he would have pulled apart in 20 minutes. He looked at it for a long moment, and then he made the decision he would spend the rest of his life turning over in his hands. He flagged it for morning review and went home. By 6 a.m., the breach was complete. 40,000 customer records, names, social security numbers, medical histories. Gone before the sun came up. Meridian Solutions woke up to the worst morning in its history, and Dion Lattimore's badge stopped working by noon. No hearing, no investigation of the timeline he had documented. No acknowledgement that he had raised concerns that were overruled. Just a phone call from HR and a cardboard box waiting at the security desk. Lynn had tried, at first, his wife of 9 years. She had sat with him through the first month. She had made dinner and not asked too many questions. She had given him space to be angry and space to be quiet, and space to be whatever broken shape he needed to be. But grief has a patience limit, and his had stretched past hers. He had stopped talking, stopped eating regular meals, stopped picking up the phone when his mother called. Lynn left on a Sunday morning in February, She didn't slam the door. That was the part he remembered most. She just closed it behind her like she was being careful not to wake someone sleeping. After that, Dion stopped counting things that mattered and started counting shift numbers instead. He was 3 years into that arrangement on the night he pushed his cart past the width window at the end of the 48th floor corridor and didn't let himself look at the city for more than 4 seconds. 3 years of knowing which elevator opened slowest. 3 years of knowing which light switch was behind the plant in the 3rd office on the left. 3 years of this building belonging to him in the only way it ever would. He turned back to the cart. He had work to do. He was halfway through vacuuming the 3rd office from the end when he noticed the light. The corner office, the big one. Floor-to-ceiling glass on 2 sides. The kind of office that announced itself before you were anywhere near the door. He had cleaned it close to 1,000 times. He knew every inch of it without having to think. The mahogany desk, the wall of framed patents, the small sculpture on the credenza that he had never once touched because something about it looked important. The light was on, dim but on. He stopped the vacuum, cut the motor. The silence came back fast and heavy the way it always did on this floor at this hour. He told himself it was a desk lamp left on. Somebody forgot. It happened twice a month at least. He would go in, empty the trash, wipe the glass walls, and leave. He pushed open the door. She was in the chair. Raina Holloway, CEO of Apex Shield. He knew her face the way employees know a CEO's face. From the framed photographs in the lobby, from the town hall recordings they were encouraged to watch, but nobody did. From the few times he had seen her in person, moving through the building at a speed that suggested the laws of time applied differently to her. She was sitting in the high-backed leather chair behind the desk, eyes closed, hands loose in her lap. Breathing slow and even asleep, or something close to it, Dion stood in the doorway for 3 full seconds, his hand on the door frame. His cart in the hallway behind him, he ran a quick inventory of what this situation required. Embury the trash can near the door. Wipe the glass partition along the left wall. Don't wake her. Don't make noise. Get out. He moved inside slowly, pulled the cart to a stop just inside the threshold, reached for the small trash can to the right of the door. And then his eyes found the monitor. He didn't mean for that to happen. The screen was angled toward the door, wide open, like whoever had positioned it had done so deliberately, or had simply forgotten, or didn't care. The display was active, and Dion Lattimore's brain, the part he had spent 3 years trying to bury under mop handles and vacuum motors and the low white noise of being nobody, that part woke up before the rest of him could stop it, because he knew exactly what he was looking at. Access logs, not the kind a regular employee would understand. Not the kind someone glances at and moves on. These were network-level administrative logs, server-side. The format was one he had read thousands of times over 11 years. Timestamps in military format, user IDs with clearance designators, file transfer records with size data and destination paths. He was 6 feet from the screen. He should not have been able to read the details from that distance, but he could, because some things once learned don't leave your eyes. He read the account name first. Tashby. Clearance level 5. He didn't know who that was, not by face, but the title landed, Chief Operating Officer. He read the file types next: pricing models, defense contract frameworks, client vulnerability assessments, internal security architecture blueprints, then the timestamps, every single transfer between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m. spread across 91 days. Not clustered, not random, patterned, deliberate. The kind of spacing that said whoever was doing this understood exactly how long it took for a bulk download to look like background noise in a system audit. 214 transfers in total. Dion felt something happen in his chest. Not panic. More like the sensation of a gear catching. Something that had been spinning loose suddenly finding its teeth. He knew this pattern. He had seen it once before. Not at this scale. Not with these kinds of files. But the architecture of it was the same. The off-hour access, the classified document targeting, the methodical spread designed to avoid triggering automated alerts. Someone was gutting this company from the inside, and they had been doing it for 3 months. He needed to leave. He knew that. He was a janitor. He had a cart with a mop and a vacuum and 2 bottles of industrial cleaning solution. He did not have clearance. He did not have authorization to be reading anything on that screen. If a security guard did a floor check right now, if anyone walked in, he would not be seen as a witness. He would be seen as the problem. Dion picked up the small trash can, walked toward the door, almost made it stop. Put the trash can down. Turned back around. There was a voice in his head. He recognized it. The same voice that had told him to flag the Meridian alert for morning review. The voice that had done the math on risk and convenience and come out on the side of let someone else handle it. He had listened to that voice once. 40,000 people had paid for it. He was not interested in what that voice had to say tonight. He pulled out his phone. His hands didn't shake. He noticed that. Somewhere in the back of his mind he filed it away. 3 years of being erased had not taken the steadiness from his hands. He held the phone up and started photographing the screen. Every entry, every timestamp, every file name tied to T. Ashby's account. He worked methodically, left. Top to bottom, he had taken 9 photographs when something else on the screen stopped him. A second IP address dented in the log, not part of the primary access record. Partially visible in a lower scroll layer he almost missed. The originating node was different from Ashby's account. Different clearance signature. Higher if the format was reading the way he thought it was. Someone else had been in this system. A different account. A different access point. The identifier was encrypted. He couldn't read the name, but he could photograph it. He did. Then he turned off his phone screen, put it in his pocket, picked up the cleaning cart, and walked out of the office without making a sound. In the chair behind the desk, Raina Holloway did not open her eyes, but her breathing had changed. The maintenance break room sat at the back of the building's basement level. A metal table, 2 plastic chairs, a coffee maker from roughly the previous decade, a shelf of cleaning supplies that smelled like chemical pine and something older underneath it. Dion sat on the bench with his back against the wall and his phone in his hands. He sat there for a full minute without doing anything. He was running the options. Opend 1. Put the phone in his pocket, finish his shift, go home, and let whatever was happening to Apex Shield become someone else's problem. He was the night shift. He had a small apartment and a steady paycheck and a quiet life built carefully from the rubble of the one that fell apart. That was worth something. He didn't let himself finish option 2. Instead, he opened his contacts and scrolled until he found the name he hadn't called in 4 years. Broderick Sauls. They had worked together at Meridian. Not close friends, but the kind of colleagues who trusted each other's judgment in rooms where judgment was what kept systems from failing. After Meridian, Broderick had moved into private digital forensics, a firm in Washington doing contract work for legal teams and occasionally for federal agencies when things needed to move quietly. Dion had not called him after the firing. He had not called anyone after the firing. But the photographs on his phone were something he couldn't evaluate alone. He needed eyes that knew what they were looking at. He pressed the call button before he could think himself out of it. 4 rings. 5. Then a voice, thick with sleep. Who is this? Not a question. A flat statement of irritation. Broderick. It's Dion Latimore. Silence. Long enough that Dion checked the screen to see if the call had dropped. Then, Dion, yeah. It's almost 3 in the morning, I know. A pause. You all right? And there it was. The question he hadn't been asked in longer than he could calculate. Not with that weight behind it. The weight of someone who actually wanted the true answer. I need your eyes on something, Dion said. I can't explain the context. I can only tell you what I saw. If I send you some photographs, can you tell me whether the pattern I'm reading is real? Broderick was quiet for a moment. The sound of him sitting up. What kind of photographs? Access logs. Network level. What looks like a coordinated bulk download pattern. Off hours. Classified document targeting. 91-day spread. The silence that followed had texture. Send them, Broderick said. Dion forwarded the photographs and waited. He didn't pace. He sat. He looked at the labels on the cleaning supply shelf across the room. He had looked at those labels so many times over 3 years that they had stopped meaning anything. Just shapes. Just color. Just the backdrop to the quiet of being no one important in a very large building. 14 minutes passed. Broderick called back. Sleep was gone from his voice. What replaced it was the tone Dion remembered from the Meridian days. Precise. Stripped of everything extra, the pattern is real, Broderick said. This isn't a system error. This isn't a backup protocol or a scheduled archive pull. The volume is too targeted and the timing distribution is too deliberate. Somebody planned this. Over months. They know exactly which files to take and exactly when to take them, so the aggregate doesn't flag a standard threshold alert. Dion let out a slow breath. Corporate espionage, Broderick said. Methodical. Whoever is running this account has high-level access and knows how the monitoring systems work from the inside. How bad? The file types you described. Pricing models, defense contract frameworks, vulnerability maps. Broderick paused. If those went to a competitor, any major bids this company submitted in the last 3 months are compromised. Any security infrastructure proposals, any defense-related submissions. Dion thought about the bankruptcy filing on Raina Holloway's desk. The yellow tab at page 47. The pen she would pick up at 9 a.m. I need to report this, he said. I need to know how. Broderick's pause was careful, Dion. You need to understand your exposure first. You're a night shift custodian who photographed a CEO's security monitor. If this goes wrong, if the evidence gets disputed, if the account holder has lawyers who move fast, you won't be seen as the person who helped. I know what I'll look like. Then you know the risk, yeah. Dion was already opening the browser on his phone. If I send you whatever else comes through, can you be a technical point of contact to verify the read? Broderick made a sound that wasn't quite a sigh. You never did have good survival instincts. That's not accurate, Dion said. I had excellent survival instincts. I just stopped using them for a while. He typed the report in plain language. No emotion, just facts. The account name, the file types, the timestamp pattern, the 91-day window. The second IP address he hadn't been able to decrypt. He attached the photographs. At the bottom of the submission form, in the contact field marked optional, he typed an email address and one sentence. I can confirm more if needed. I know these systems. He submitted the report. He sat for another minute in the break room. Then he picked up the cleaning cart and went back to work because he still had 4 floors left on his rotation, and the floors didn't care what he had just done. Raina Holloway had not been asleep. Not for 1 second of the past 4 hours. She had been sitting in that chair with her eyes closed and her breathing controlled, and her entire attention aimed at the door of her office like a wire-pulled taut. She had learned to hold herself this way in the early years of the company. When she had to take calls in borrowed conference rooms and look like she belonged there. When she had to walk into rooms full of people who had already decided she shouldn't be there and make them change their minds one by being undeniably right. Control what you show. Control what you reveal. Keep the rest for yourself. She had heard the cart wheels stop outside her door. She had heard the door open. She had kept her breathing even and her hands still and her eyes closed, and she had waited to see what a person did when they believed no one was watching. It was a test, a desperate one. And she knew it. She had set up the access log display deliberately, left the screen angled toward the door deliberately. She didn't know who would come through that door tonight. She didn't know if anyone would notice anything on that screen. Most people wouldn't know what they were looking at. Most people would empty the trash and leave. But she had spent 14 months watching her company lose contracts it should have won, watching an opponent mirror her strategies with a precision that defied coincidence, watching the people around her offer explanations that never quite held weight. She had needed to know whether anyone in this building still had something honest in them. She had heard the footsteps stop. She had heard the long silence that meant someone was reading the screen. And then the camera click, so quiet she almost missed it, but she had been listening for exactly that kind of quiet. The quiet of a decision being made by someone who thought they were alone. She had not opened her eyes, because if he saw her watching, whatever he chose to do next would no longer be his choice. She needed it to be his. After he left, she counted to 60. Then she sat up, she pulled the keyboard close and began to read. She read every line of the log still scrolling on her screen, not skimming, reading. The way she had read every contract, every technical spec, every financial disclosure in the 19 years since she started Apex Shield in a rented office in Baltimore, with a second-hand server and a belief that the world needed better infrastructure security. She had coded the first product herself, slept 4 hours a night for 3 years, taken meetings with people who looked at her like she was in the wrong room and made them reconsider by being correct about everything that mattered. She had done all of that. And now she was sitting in her office at 3 a.m. reading proof that the man she had trusted most was handing everything she built to someone else, piece by piece. For 91 days, Trevor Ashby, 15 years. He had been her first real hire. Back when Apex Shield still existed in the phase where hire meant I need one person who can do 6 jobs and won't ask about benefits yet. He had been 33 years old with a systems background and a directness she had liked immediately. He didn't pitch himself. He told her exactly what he could do and what he couldn't do, and said the rest was up to her. She had said yes on the spot. 15 years, every board presentation, every contract negotiation, every late-night crisis when the phone rang, and she needed someone whose judgment she didn't have to second-guess. She had given him the COO title because she believed no one understood the company's architecture better than he did. And for 91 days, he had been using that understanding to hollow it out. She sat back in her chair, let the betrayal settle. She had prepared for rage. Rage would have been useful. Rage had fuel in it. What arrived instead was colder, more like recognition, the recognition of a pattern she had seen before but never in her own house. She looked back at the screen, and then she saw it. The second IP address in the log, she had almost missed it. Embedded in a lower scroll layer of the administrative record, a secondary access node with a different clearance signature. She leaned closer. The identifier was partially encrypted, but not fully. Whoever had set up this access had used a high clearance credential. High enough that the standard audit display only showed partial information. High enough that it would be invisible to a routine review. Raina Holloway was not doing a routine review. She traced the node signature through the administrative backend. 40 minutes, 3 separate system layers. 2 credential tables cross-referenced. Her fingers moved with the speed of someone who had not forgotten the technical foundation of everything she built, no matter how many executive floors she had climbed above it. When the name resolved on her screen, she went very still. Wendell Greer, chairman of the board. She read it again. Wendell Greer, the man who had called her 3 days ago to convene the emergency board session. The man who had framed the bankruptcy filing as a reluctant necessity. The man who had sat across from her in the glass conference room with the practiced expression of someone sharing in a grief he had spent months engineering, not just espionage. A controlled demolition. Trevon hollowed out the company from inside, siphoned its intelligence, made it lose bids it should have won, made it look like the market was moving against them through natural forces. And Wendell sat on the board and made sure that when Apex Shield was on its knees, the vote would go the way it needed to go. Ridgecorp would come in after. Buy the assets at collapse price. Everything she had built for 19 years, acquired at a fraction of its real value by the company that had been receiving its stolen intelligence for 3 months. She said the name out loud in the empty office. Ridgecorp. They had not beaten her. They had been given everything she had, by someone she trusted. While someone she trusted to protect her held the exit door open, Raina looked at the bankruptcy filing on her desk, 47 pages. Page 47. The signature line. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she turned back to the screen. There was work to do before 9 a.m. 7:43 in the morning, Trevon Ashby came through the lobby entrance wearing a charcoal suit and carrying 2 cups of coffee. He took the elevator to the 48th floor. He walked down the corridor with the unhurried ease of a man who had walked this corridor for 15 years and felt entitled to every foot of it. He knocked twice on Raina's door and opened it without waiting. She was at her desk. The bankruptcy filing was open in front of her. She looked tired, which she was. She had not slept. She had spent the hours between 4 a.m. and 7 a.m. documenting everything she found, cross-referencing, building a record that was no longer a suspicion. Trevon set one of the coffees on her desk. Long night, his voice was smooth, calibrated, warm in the way of someone who had rehearsed warmth until it lost its temperature. Raina picked up the coffee. Thank you. She did not look at him the way she would have yesterday. She looked at him the way you look at a document you are still processing, carefully, without revealing the conclusion you've already reached. He sat across from her and began walking through the board meeting agenda, the bankruptcy timeline, the asset assessment, the communication plan for employees and shareholders. He spoke with the calm authority of a man who had already accepted how the day would end, or had decided how it would end. Raina listened. She watched his mouth form words that were performance. She watched his hands stay still in the way of someone who had trained stillness into their body over years of practice. She thought about 15 years, about every version of this man she had trusted across every table. and she wondered how long ago the version she thought she knew had stopped being the real one. At 8:52, she picked up her pen. The board members were already in the glass conference room. She could see them through the wall. 9 people. Jerome Ames opening folders, tablets on the table, water bottles. The quiet efficiency of people prepared to make a decision they had already made. Raina walked into the room, sat at the head of the table. The bankruptcy filing was placed in front of her. Open to page 47. The yellow tab still in place. Wendell Greer sat 2 seats to her left, silver-haired, composed, his face arranged into the expression of a man sharing in collective sorrow he had spent months building toward. She picked up her pen. The room went quiet in the way rooms go quiet when the only thing left is the final action. She looked at the page. Her pen hovered. Wendell uncrossed and recrossed his legs. Trevon was very still. The clock on the wall read 8:56. The tip of the pen touched the paper, and the conference room door opened. The woman who stepped inside did not knock, did not apologize, did not pause at the threshold. She moved like someone who had already decided. She held up a badge. Agent Camille Dupree. Federal Bureau of Investigation. 1 beat of silence. We're here to execute a search warrant on the accounts and devices of Trevon Ashby, Chief Operating Officer of Apex Shield. In connection with an ongoing federal investigation, the room did not move, did not breathe. Trevon's hands, perfectly still on the table, stayed still, but something in his face shifted. Very small, very fast, gone before anyone else in that room would have caught it. Raina caught it. She had been watching for it. Trevon turned to her slowly. The warmth had dropped entirely from his voice. "What is this?" Raina met his eyes. She did not answer. Wendell Greer was on his feet. His chair scraped back. His voice came in fast and hard. Jurisdiction, validity, the outrage of a man wrongly interrupted, performing it too quickly, too completely. Agent Dupree turned to him. She reached into the folder under her left arm and produced a second document. She held it out. Wendell took it. His hands were not quite steady. He looked down at the paper, and the performance stopped. Every person in that room watched something leave Wendell Greer's face. Not just the outrage, not just the composure, the whole structure of how he had presented himself to this board, to this company, for years. It left all at once, because the second warrant carried his name. The conference room held its silence. Raina looked at the bankruptcy filing open in front of her, page 47. The signature line unsigned. She set the pen down. She was not thinking about the document anymore. She was thinking about a man she had never spoken to. Man whose name she did not yet know. A man who had stood in her office at 2 in the morning with a cleaning cart and a telephone and the wreckage of a former life still living somewhere behind his eyes. He had seen what none of the people in this room had seen, or what they had seen and refused to name. And he had not walked away. Whatever happened in the next 72 hours, whatever the investigation uncovered, whatever it cost him personally, he had not walked away. Raina Holloway sat at the head of that table and let that land in the place where she kept the things that actually changed her. Not board meetings, not headlines, not contracts won or lost. The thing that changed her was this. A man with everything to lose and no obvious reason to act had acted anyway, at 2:30 in the morning, when no one was watching, when no one would ever have known. The room around her was fracturing into voices. Questions. The sound of lawyers being called. The sound of a plan coming apart in real time. Raina let it happen. Agent Dupree placed a hand on the conference room door and looked at Trevon Ashby. "Mr. Ashby, now please." Trevon stood. He buttoned his jacket slowly, deliberately, the motion of a man choosing to appear composed rather than being forced to move. He turned and looked at Raina one final time. The expression on his face was not rage, not contempt. It was something she had not prepared for, regret, the real kind. The kind that arrives too late to matter and knows it. He held her gaze for 2 seconds. Then he turned and walked out without another word. The door closed. Wendell Greer was still standing, the warrant slightly crumpled in his grip. The room waited. Raina looked at the bankruptcy filing one last time. "Then she closed it, I think," she said quietly. "To no one and to everyone, we need to postpone this meeting." The conference room stayed frozen for 11 seconds. Dean counted later when he reconstructed it in his head. He wasn't there. He didn't see it happen. But he would piece it together from what Agent Dupree told him during the formal interview, from what Broderick relayed after speaking with the investigators, from the way the story moved through the building in the days that followed with the particular momentum of something that had been held under pressure for a long time, and was now releasing all at once. 11 seconds where nobody moved, where the most powerful people in that building sat in their chairs and tried to understand what had just walked through the door. And then everything started moving at once. Dion was in the basement when his phone vibrated. He had finished his shift at 6 a.m., clocked out at the facilities desk the way he always did, signed the log, handed back the master key card, said nothing to Gerald, who was already half buried in the morning supply inventory, and only nodded in return. Standard exit, standard morning, except nothing about this morning was standard. He had sat in the break room for 40 minutes after clocking out, which was unusual. He always went home after his shift. Home was small and quiet and required nothing from him. But this morning home felt like the wrong direction, like arriving somewhere before the journey had finished. So he sat. He drank bad coffee from the machine on the counter. He looked at his hands. He thought about the photographs on his phone and the submission form he had filled out at 3 in the morning. He thought about the contact field he had chosen not to leave blank. The email address. The one sentence. I can confirm more if needed. I know these systems. He had written that and meant it. And now, sitting in the break room in the early grey light of a Thursday morning, he was very clear-eyed about what he had done. He had put his name adjacent to a federal tip report involving a sitting chief operating officer of a company valued at over $2 billion, his contact. His technical read on evidence he had obtained by standing in a room he was authorized to clean and looking at a screen he was not authorized to read. The coffee was bad. He drank it anyway. His phone vibrated at 8:47 a.m. Not a call. An email to the address he had created at 3 in the morning. He opened it. The sender was an FBI field office. The message was 4 sentences. It asked him to confirm his identity and availability for a phone verification call within the next 30 minutes. It said the information he submitted was being reviewed in connection with an active investigation. It said a technical point of contact could be included in the call if he had one available. Dion read the email twice. Then he called Broderick. Broderick picked up on the second ring, which meant he had been awake and waiting. They emailed, Dion said. I know. I got a separate contact 20 minutes ago. A pause. They've been building a case against Ridgecore for 6 months. Your photographs gave them the internal access point they didn't have. Dion sat with that 6 months. The FBI had been constructing something for 6 months, and the final piece had come from a janitor with a phone camera at 2:30 in the morning. They're moving this morning, Broderick said. I told them I'd serve as your technical corroborating contact. You need to call back within the next 20 minutes. Dion looked at the coffee cup in his hand. Set it down. Okay, he said. You understand what comes after this? It wasn't a question. Broderick knew he understood. Yeah, Dion said. I understand. Your name goes into a federal record, I know, permanently. Broderick, he kept his voice level, I know. A short pause on the other end. All right then, Dion called the number in the email. The voice on the other end was measured and wasted nothing, Mr. Lattimore. I'm Special Agent Camille Dupree. I have your submission in front of me. Before we proceed, I need to ask you some questions about the nature of your access to the information you photographed. Go ahead. You're listed in Apex Shield's employment records as custodial staff assigned to the upper floor rotation. Yes. On the night in question, you entered the executive corner office on the 48th floor as part of your standard cleaning rotation. Yes, the monitor displaying the access log was visible from the doorway when you entered. It was angled toward the door. I could read it from 6 feet away without moving toward the desk. A brief pause. The sound of something being written. Did you access any computer system, keyboard, or digital device during your time in that office? No. Did you touch the monitor or any peripheral connected to it? No, you photographed the screen using your personal device from a standing position near the entrance of the room. Yes, Mr. Lattimore. Agent Dupree's voice shifted. Still professional, but the quality of it changed. More direct, less procedural. I want to be transparent with you about 2 things. The first is that based on your submission and the technical corroboration provided by your contact, we are executing search warrants this morning. The photographs you provided contain data consistent with what we've been developing independently for 6 months. Your submission identified the internal access point we didn't have visibility on. Dion was quiet. The second thing, she continued, is that your name will appear in the federal record of this investigation as a reporting source. That record is not public, but it exists, and I want to make sure you understand that before we go further. I understand you're not being investigated, but you will be asked to provide a formal statement. Likely in person, okay, a pause. Then, with a slightly different quality than the rest of the interview. Can I ask you something? He waited. You had the option to submit anonymously. The form allows for it. Why didn't you? Dion looked at the shelf of cleaning supplies across the room, the labels. The industrial font on the blue bottles he had looked at so many times over 3 years, that they had stopped registering as anything except the backdrop of where his life had ended up. Because staying anonymous would have been the same move I already made once, he said. And I already know how that ends. Agent Dupree was quiet for a moment. We'll be in touch about the formal statement, she said. Thank you, Mr. Lattimore. The call ended. Dion sat in the break room for a few more minutes. Then he went home. He didn't sleep. He lay on his back in his apartment with the morning light coming through the blinds in thin lines across the ceiling. He listened to the building wake up around him. Pipes. A door somewhere down the hall. Traffic building on the street below. The ordinary sounds of a world that had no awareness of what had happened 48 floors above it a few hours ago. He thought about Trevon Ashby, not with anger. He had expected anger, had prepared for it the way you prepare for weather you know is coming. But what arrived instead was quieter than anger and harder to sit with. A kind of recognition he hadn't wanted. Trevon Ashby had been good at his job. That was the part that stayed. The man had spent 15 years being genuinely competent, genuinely trusted, genuinely essential to something real, and then he had made a decision. One decision in one direction for a price he had apparently decided was worth it. And after the first decision, the rest came easier. They always did that mechanism better than he wanted to. He had made his own first wrong decision once. Not the same kind, not for the same reason, but the structure of it was recognizable. The way a single choice could become the load-bearing wall of everything that followed. The way you could build a life on top of a decision made in one bad moment, and then spend years maintaining the structure because tearing it down meant admitting what was underneath. He had done that, 3 years of it. Choosing the night shift, choosing the basement break room, choosing the counting. All of it built on top of a November night when he had looked at a warning flag and told himself someone else would catch it in the morning. The difference between him and Trevon Ashby, he thought, was not that one of them had made a bad choice and the other hadn't. The difference was what the choice was for. Trevon Ashby had chosen to take something. Dion had chosen that night at Meridian to protect something. His own exhausted body. His own need to stop and go home. He had not chosen to harm. He had chosen to rest at the wrong moment, in the wrong situation, without enough support around him to catch what he missed. He had spent 3 years telling himself those were the same story. They weren't. He lay on his back and let that distinction settle slowly through him, the way cold water settles, the way something true settles when you stop fighting it. The ceiling didn't change. The light moved the way it always moved. The city outside kept doing what cities do, but something inside the room felt different. He didn't name it, he just let it be there. Broderick arrived at 4:30 that afternoon. He had driven down from Washington without telling Dion he was coming. He knocked on the apartment door, and when Dion opened it, Broderick was standing in the hallway, holding a paper bag from the diner 2 blocks away, the one Dion had walked past 100 times without going inside. His expression said he had made a unilateral decision about what Dion needed right now and wasn't interested in debating it. "You haven't eaten," Broderick said. "How would you know that?" "Because I know you." He walked in without being invited, set the bag on the small kitchen table, pulled out 2 containers. "Sit down." Dion sat down. They ate in the easy silence of 2 people who had known each other long enough not to fill quiet with noise. It was the first time in longer than Dion could accurately place that he had sat across a table from someone he actually knew. Not a coworker, not a building acquaintance. Someone who remembered who he had been before the night shift. Someone who had watched him disappear and hadn't stopped knowing where he was. He noticed that, filed it somewhere it could be felt later. "They executed the warrants at 9 this morning," Broderick said after a while. "Ashby and someone else." "A board member," Dion looked up. "Greer." The chairman, Broderick, met his eyes steadily. Dupree's team found the secondary access point in the photographs you submitted. The encrypted identifier you couldn't read. They decrypted it in 3 hours. He paused. Greer had been in the system too, different function from Ashby. Ashby was pulling intelligence. Greer was positioned to control the board vote. Dion set down his fork. The working theory, Broderick said, is that Ashby weakened the company from inside over 3 months. Fed Ridgecorps the intelligence they needed to underbid Apex Shield on every major contract, made the losses look like market forces, not sabotage. And when the company was on its knees, Greer made sure the board voted to dissolve. He paused. Ridgecorps was positioned to come in and buy the assets at collapse price. The whole thing was staged from both ends. Dion was quiet for a long moment. She was going to sign the papers at 9, he said. I know. The warrants came through at 8:56. Broderick looked at him. I know. The weight of 4 minutes sat between them on the table. 4 minutes between Raina Holloway signing away 19 years of work and a federal agent walking through that door. 4 minutes that had balanced on a photograph taken by a man cleaning floors at 2:30 in the morning. Dion thought about what would have happened if he had put the trash can back by the door and left. He stopped thinking about it. She didn't sign, Broderick said. No, Dion said. She didn't. They finished eating without talking much more. But it was the kind of not talking that felt full rather than empty. The kind that said everything had already been said and what was left was just two people sitting together in the wake of something that had mattered. After a while, Broderick stacked the empty containers and said, You doing all right? Dion looked at the table. Then at Broderick. Yeah, he said. I think I actually am. Broderick nodded once. Like that was exactly what he had come to hear. The formal statement took place 2 days later. A field office downtown, a plain room, fluorescent light, a table with a water bottle on each side that neither of them touched. Broderick seated to Dion's left as his technical corroborating contact. Agent Dupree across from them with a colleague who took notes and said almost nothing the entire time. The questioning was thorough in the way federal questioning is thorough. Not aggressive, just complete. Dupree walked him through every moment in that office in order. His position in the room, his distance from the screen, what he saw in what sequence and in what level of detail. She asked about his professional background, the 11 years at Meridian, his familiarity with the specific log format he had photographed. He answered everything directly, without hedging, without softening the facts to make himself look better or the situation look simpler than it was. The facts were the facts. He had been in the room. He had seen the screen. He had understood what he was looking at. He had made a choice. That was the story, and it didn't need any architecture built around it. Dupree asked about the unauthorized access question 3 different ways across the course of the interview. Each time Dion answered the same way. He had not touched any device. He had not accessed any system. He had photographed a screen that was visible from the doorway of a room he was authorized to enter as part of his assigned duties. Each time she wrote something down. Near the end of the session, she set her pen down and looked at him not as a witness, but as a person. Mr. Lattimore, you're not being charged with anything. I want to be clear. The nature of your access to the information on that screen does not constitute unauthorized system access under federal statute. Your photographs are being entered as supporting documentation. The primary evidence comes from the server logs our forensic team pulled directly from Apex Shield's infrastructure. She paused. Your role in this record is as a reporting source. That's how it reads and that's how it will remain. Dion nodded. She held his gaze. I want to ask you something outside the formal record. He waited. You knew the risk, she said. You'd been out of the industry for 3 years. You had a job that gave you stability and no visibility. You photographed a CEO's security monitor in the middle of the night and put your contact information on a federal tip report. She let that sit. What made you do it? Dion looked at the table for a moment, then back up at her. I made a mistake once, he said. A real one. I saw something I should have acted on and I chose not to. The reasons felt sufficient at the time. They weren't, he paused. That woman upstairs was going to sign papers that would end a company she built from nothing. Because someone she trusted decided to take it apart for money. I knew that. I couldn't unknow it. And I had already lived through what happens when you look away from the thing you know is wrong. He stopped. I wasn't going to do it twice. Dupree held his gaze for a moment, then she picked up her pen, wrote something, looked up. "Thank you, Mr. Lattimore," she said. "We'll be in touch if we need anything further." He stood, shook her hand, walked out of the room with Broderick a half step behind him. In the hallway outside, Broderick said nothing for a moment, then, "You just described integrity to a federal agent like it was the most ordinary thing in the world." Dion looked at him. "Isn't it?" Broderick was quiet for a second. "It should be," he said. They walked out into the afternoon. The forensic audit of Apex Shield's servers ran parallel to everything else and confirmed what the access logs had shown in full. 214 classified file transfers over 91 days, all originating from Trevon Ashby's account, all targeting documents directly linked to contracts that Ridgecore had subsequently won. The pattern held without exception across the entire 91-day window. The digital trail extended further than the downloads. Investigators found encrypted communications between Ashby and Aldrich Bowen, a senior vice president at Ridgecore, detailing a compensation arrangement tied directly to each contract Ridgecore secured using Apex Shield's stolen data. The payments totaled $4.2 million, routed through a shell company registered in Houston, paid in increments calibrated to avoid triggering financial reporting thresholds. Ashby had not done this out of grievance, not out of ideology, not out of some wound in the relationship with Rayner that made the betrayal complicated. He had done it for money. Clean and simple and ultimately small, given the scale of what it cost. Wendell Greer's arrangement was different in structure and similar in essence. $800,000 over 14 months to ensure that when the board convened to vote on Apex Shield's future, the outcome would serve the people who had paid for it. Greer had cultivated his position on that board over years, patient, trusted, apparently deeply committed to the company's welfare. Every conversation, every expression of concern, every carefully worded recommendation to dissolve rather than restructure, all of it in service of a result he had already agreed to deliver. The federal defense contract Ridgecore had won the previous year, the one that had been the final blow to Apex Shield's financials, was suspended pending review within 48 hours of the warrants. The technical framework of Ridgecore's winning bid mirrored Apex Shield's classified submission with a precision that no independent development process could produce. Within a week of the arrests, 2 of the 3 major enterprise clients who had left Apex Shield in the preceding year reached out to request conversations. The news of how Ridgecore had built its competitive advantage had a specific effect on people who ran companies. Nobody liked learning they had been won by a bid built on intelligence that was stolen from someone else. It made them feel like part of the theft had been aimed at them too. In a way, it had Apex Shield was not saved overnight. The bankruptcy filing was pulled from the table, but the conditions that had made it necessary didn't dissolve with the warrants. There were still debts to address. A significant gap in leadership where the COO had stood for 15 years. A company that had been losing ground steadily for over a year and needed more than a legal victory to rebuild. But the fall had stopped. Something that had been in free fall was now standing still on uncertain ground, which, after the past 14 months, felt like something close to solid. Raina Holloway spent the 72 hours after the warrants in a series of calls she had not planned to make and meetings she had not planned to hold. The board, minus 2 of its members, convened an emergency session. The remaining directors, confronted with the forensic audit and the scope of what Greer had arranged, moved quickly to distance the institution from what had happened, and equally quickly to recognize that the institution itself required reconstruction. New legal counsel was retained by end of day 1, a forensic accounting firm was engaged by end of day 2, by end of day 3 the injunction against Ridgecore had been filed. Raina handled all of it. She moved through those 72 hours with the same velocity she had always moved through crises, which is to say she moved without stopping and without showing the cost of not stopping. She made decisions, she signed documents. She took calls from lawyers and investigators and board members and journalists, giving the journalists nothing and the lawyers everything they needed. She did not go back to the 48th floor until the 3rd evening. When she did, she sat in her office in the dark for about 20 minutes before turning on the lamp. The monitor was off. The access logs were no longer running. The room smelled faintly of floor disinfectant, which it always did after the night shift came through. She sat there and thought about a man she still did not know, The man who had stood in this room 3 nights ago and made a choice she had spent those 3 nights trying to understand. Not the mechanics of it, the why of it. He had no stake in the outcome. No shares, no contract, no performance review tied to the company's survival. He had a cleaning cart and a phone and 11 years of expertise he had spent 3 years pretending he no longer had, and he had used all of it, for a company whose CEO didn't know his name. She had set the trap hoping to find out whether anyone in this building still had integrity. She had found her answer, and now she had to figure out what to do with it. She turned the lamp on, opened her laptop, and started looking for his file in the building's employment records. His name, she learned, was Dion Lattimore. She read what was there, which wasn't much. Start date, position, schedule, emergency contact. 3 years without a single disciplinary note. 3 years of clocking in at 10 p.m. and clocking out at 6 a.m. and doing the work he was assigned and asking nothing else of anyone. She read the sparse file twice. Then she closed the laptop and looked at the window. The city was doing what it always did at this hour, moving, lit, ongoing. She had looked at this view from this chair for years and had not once thought about the people who made it possible to look at it from a clean room, with clean floors and functioning lights and restocked supplies. She had not thought about them because she had not needed to, which, she understood now, was precisely the problem. She picked up her phone, not to call him. Not yet. She had a question she needed to answer for herself first. About what she was going to offer him and why. About whether what she was planning was something she was doing because she owed him something, or because it was the right structural decision for a company that had just learned, very expensively. What happens when integrity isn't built into the architecture? She sat with that question for the rest of the evening. By the time she left the office, she had her answer. It was both. And that was fine. Because sometimes the right decision and the debt you owe point in the same direction, and pretending otherwise was just another kind of performance. She took the elevator down, walked through the lobby, through the glass doors and out into the night air that was cooler now than it had been 3 days ago. The city moved around her the way it always did. She had work to do. She always had work to do. But tonight it felt different. Like the work ahead was connected to something real in a way the work of the past 14 months had not been. Like she was walking towards something instead of running from it. She walked to her car, and for the first time in over a year, she was not dreading tomorrow. On the 11th night after the warrants, Dion Lattimore was cleaning the lobby when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned. Raina Holloway was crossing the lobby from the elevator bank. Just past 11:30 at night, still in work clothes, a deep burgundy wrap dress, the fabric catching the lobby light as she moved, hair down tonight for the first time he had seen. She moved with the same velocity he had always associated with her, but something in it was different. Less propulsion forward, more weight behind each step. Like a person who had been moving at speed for 11 days straight and had finally decided to move with intention instead. She stopped when she saw him. He stopped too. They looked at each other across the lobby floor he had just finished mopping. The floor that was, technically, still wet. "I'll need 5 minutes," she said. Not a question, he stood the mop against the cart. "Okay." She walked to the seating area near the front windows. 2 chairs, a low table, the kind of arrangement that existed in lobbies to suggest hospitality without being required to provide it. She sat. He sat across from her. The city moved outside the glass behind her. Still alive at this hour, headlights, lit windows, the low constant presence of a city that doesn't pause for any individual thing happening inside it. She looked at him directly. No preamble. "I know what you did," she said. He waited. "I was awake," she said. "That entire night. The whole time you were in my office, I was awake. I heard you come in. I heard you stop moving. I heard the camera." He absorbed this without expression. "I didn't open my eyes," she said, "because I needed you to make whatever choice you were going to make without me watching. I needed it to be yours. Not a performance for an audience." He looked at her steadily. "That was a significant risk. Yes. What if I'd just left? Then I would have signed the papers at 9, and that would have been the end of it." She held his gaze without flinching. "But I had spent 14 months watching everything fall apart while people I trusted told me it was market forces and competitive pressure and my own pricing model. I needed to know if anyone inside this building still had something honest in them, and I didn't know how to find out without creating the conditions for it. Dion was quiet for a moment. You angled the screen toward the door. Yes. You left the log running. Yes. He sat back slightly, not offended. Processing. You didn't know I'd understand what I was looking at. No, I didn't know your background. I didn't know who would come through that door. I didn't know if anyone would know what the screen meant. A pause. I only knew I had run out of ways to see clearly from inside the situation. I needed to see what happened when I stopped controlling it. Most people would have seen it and kept moving, he said. Most people would have, she agreed. Why do you think I didn't? She looked at him for a moment. Like she had already thought about this and was deciding how directly to say what she had concluded. Because whatever happened to you before you came here, she said, it didn't take the part of you that recognizes a wrong when you're standing in front of one. And it didn't take the part that can't leave it alone once it's been recognized. She paused. Most people lose one or the other eventually. You didn't lose either. Dion looked at the window. At the city moving behind her, I used to be someone who understood those systems, he said. When I saw what was on that screen, I couldn't pretend I didn't understand it. That would have been a different kind of lie than the ones I was already telling myself. She was quiet. What kind of lies, she said. Careful, not pressing. Just asking that I was done, he said. That I had used up whatever I had, and the right thing was to stay small and stay out of the way and not take up space that belonged to people who hadn't made the mistake I made. He paused. I'd been telling myself that for 3 years. Walking into your office that night was the first time I had proof it wasn't true. Raina listened without performing sympathy, without softening the silence into something easier. She just let what he said exist in the space between them, which was the most honest thing anyone had done for him in a long time. Then she said, I want you to consider something. He waited. I'm building a new division, she said. Internal oversight, ethics and integrity operations. The function is to monitor access patterns inside our systems, flag anomalies before they become breaches, and build the kind of internal architecture that means what happened with Trevon Ashby cannot happen again. Not just technically, culturally and structurally both. She looked at him without hesitation. I need someone to lead it, not a consultant, not someone who reads this company like a document they've been handed. Someone who understands systems from the foundation up. Someone who knows what erosion looks like before the wall comes down. Someone whose judgment I already know I can trust when the room is empty and no one is checking. Dion looked at her, held her gaze. You're offering this because you believe you owe me something, he said. No pause, no softening. I'm offering this because you were the only person in this building who saw the truth and moved toward it instead of away. Everyone else, including me, was either blind or afraid. You were neither. She stopped. And because the company that nearly died here needs to be led by people who understand what it costs to miss something and what it takes to make it right. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said the thing that had been sitting in his chest since he walked through the lobby doors tonight and understood that this conversation was going somewhere real. Before you finish the offer, he said, there's something you need to know about who you're asking. She waited. I made a serious mistake at my last job, he said. I missed something I should have caught. 40,000 people lost their data. I lost the job. I lost everything attached to it. And I came here and cleaned floors for 3 years, partly because I needed income and partly because I believed I didn't deserve to be trusted with anything that mattered anymore. She didn't look away. You want to give me responsibility for this company's integrity function, he said. You need to know that's who you're specifically asking. Raina was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, it was without performance, without calibration, without anything except the thing she actually meant. I know who I'm asking, she said. I'm asking the man who knows what it costs when something goes wrong. The man who has lived inside that knowledge for 3 years and didn't let it become an excuse to stop caring. She paused. I don't want someone who has never been wrong. I want someone who understands what wrong actually looks like from the inside, and what it requires to correct it. Dion looked at his hands, the hands that hadn't shaken at 2:30 in the morning. Then he looked back up at her. Give me 2 days, he said. She stood, smoothed the front of her dress in the automatic way of someone who had spent 20 years presenting herself as composed, regardless of what was happening underneath it. I'll be here, she said. She walked back to the elevator. The doors closed. and Dion Lattimore sat in the lobby of a building he had been cleaning for 3 years, in a chair no one had ever expected him to sit in, and looked out at the city through the glass. He didn't feel the need to look away this time. He gave himself 2 days, that was what he had told Raina. 2 days, which sounded measured when he said it, professional, like a man who needed time to weigh an important decision before committing to it. What it actually was this. A man sitting in a small apartment looking at the same 4 walls he had looked at for 3 years, trying to figure out if he was the person he used to be or the person he had become, and whether those 2 things were different enough to matter, and whether different meant worse, and whether worse meant permanent. 2 days of that. The first morning he woke at 5:45 without an alarm. 3 years of night shifts had rewired him in ways he hadn't fully mapped. He lay there looking at the ceiling, listening to the building settle around him, the pipes, the elevator somewhere below, the sound of the street deciding to be a street again at that hour. He thought about Trevon Ashby, not with anger. He had expected anger and prepared himself for it, the way you prepare for weather you know is coming. But what arrived instead was quieter than anger and more uncomfortable to sit with, something close to recognition. Trevon Ashby had spent 15 years being genuinely good at his job. That was the part that stayed with Dion. The man had been competent and trusted and essential to something real, and then he had made a decision, one decision, in one direction, for a price he had apparently concluded was worth it. And after the first decision, the subsequent ones came with less resistance. They always did. That was how it worked. The first one was the hardest because the line was still visible. After that, the line moved with you. Dion understood that mechanism. He had stood at his own line once. Not the same kind of line, not for the same reason, but the structure of it was recognizable. The way a single choice could become the load-bearing wall of everything built on top of it. The way you could maintain a life constructed on a bad decision for years, because tearing it down meant going back and standing in the rubble of the moment you made it. He had done that. 3 years of it, not consciously, not as a plan. But the night shift, the basement break room, the counting, all of it had been built on top of a Tuesday in November, when he had looked at a warning flag ag and told himself morning would be soon enough. He had been telling himself that the decision to go home that night was why he didn't deserve to be trusted again. But lying on his back in the early morning quiet, thinking about Trevon Ashby and the difference between a man who chose to take and a man who chose to rest at the wrong moment, Dion understood something he had been resisting for 3 years. He had flagged the risk at Meridian. Twice, in writing, he had raised the concern and been told to keep moving and gone home because he was running on 4 hours of sleep and had nothing left. That was not the same as choosing to cause harm. That was being a human being in an impossible position without enough support around him to catch what he missed. He had spent 3 years treating those as the same story. They were not. Trevon Ashby had opened a file transfer application at 1 in the morning and made a series of deliberate choices over 91 consecutive days. Each one clear, each one intentional, each one aimed at someone else's destruction for personal gain. Dion Lattimore had gone home exhausted on a night when he had already done everything the situation allowed him to do. Those were different stories, fundamentally different, and he had been living inside the wrong one for 3 years. He lay on his back and let that distinction move through him slowly. Not with relief exactly. More like the cessation of setting down something heavy that you had been carrying so long, you had forgotten it wasn't part of your body. The ceiling didn't change. The light moved the way it always moved, but something in the room felt different from the inside. He got up, made coffee, stood at the kitchen window looking at the street below, a woman walking a dog, a delivery truck idling at the corner, 2 men at a bus stop checking their phones. Ordinary life at 6 in the morning, asking nothing from him. He had found comfort in that once. The world not requiring anything from him. Now it felt like something he was ready to leave behind. He called Broderick that afternoon, not about the job. He had been moving toward a decision about the job since the moment he sat across from Raina in the lobby and heard her say, "I know who I'm asking." He called because he needed to say something out loud to someone who knew the full length of it, not just the recent chapter. Broderick answered on the 3rd ring. "You've decided," Broderick said. "I need to tell you something first." A pause that meant he was listening. "When Meridian let me go," Dion said, "I could have contested it. I had the emails. I had the timestamps showing I flagged the risk before the breach. I had documentation that my concerns were overruled. I had a case that a decent employment attorney could have built into something real. Broderick was quiet. I didn't fight it, Dion said. I told myself I was too tired, that it wasn't worth it, that I probably deserved whatever I got. He paused. None of that was the actual reason. What was the actual reason? If I fought and lost, I'd have to stay in the industry knowing everyone knew what happened. If I fought and won, I'd have to go back and keep doing the work, knowing I was the person whose lapse had cost 40,000 people their privacy. He stopped. Either way, I had to keep living inside it, and I didn't think I could. Broderick said nothing for a moment. So I made everything smaller, Dion said. I made my whole life smaller. Because a smaller life has smaller consequences, and smaller consequences meant I couldn't cause that kind of damage again. The line was quiet. Yeah, Broderick said. Not agreement or disagreement. Just acknowledgement. The way you acknowledge something true when it doesn't need anything added to it. I've been carrying the wrong version of that story, Dion said. For 3 years, I made a mistake. But the mistake I made was not the same as the mistake I've been punishing myself for. I flagged it. I was overruled, I was exhausted. That's not the same as choosing to let it happen. Broderick let the silence hold for a moment, then he said, No, it's not. I'm done making it smaller, Dion said. Another pause. Shorter this time. About time, Broderick said. And that was the whole conversation. He didn't need more than that. Some things only need to be said once, to the right person, in the right direction. The value isn't in the response. It's in the saying. In letting the words exist outside your own head where they've been circling for years and finally hearing them for what they actually are. He spent the rest of the first day doing nothing in particular. He walked to the diner 2 blocks from the building, the one he had walked past 100 times without going in, and sat at the counter and ordered food and ate it while looking at the street through the window. Nobody knew him there. Nobody brought anything to the place except a plate and a refill on his coffee. It was the most unremarkable hour he had spent in months, and it felt, for reasons he couldn't fully articulate, like something important. He walked back to his apartment in the late afternoon, sat in the one good chair by the window, watched the light change on the buildings across the street. He thought about what Raina had said. I want someone who understands what wrong looks like from the inside, and what it requires to correct it. He turned that over for a while. Then he stopped turning it over, because he already knew the answer. He had known it since the lobby. The second morning he went back to the building, not to clean. His shift wasn't until that evening. He went in the front entrance for the first time since he had started 3 years ago. He had always used the service entrance on the east side of the building. The service entrance was where the night shift came in. That was the rule, and he had never questioned it because he had never thought of himself as someone with a reason to use any other door. Today he walked through the front. The lobby security guard on the morning desk was a man named Orville who had worked that shift for at least 2 of the 3 years Dion had been in the building. They had spoken maybe 5 times in total. Brief exchanges at shift crossover. 2 people occupying completely different versions of the same building. Orville looked up when Dion came through the glass doors, looked at him for a beat longer than usual. Mr. Lattimore, he said. Dion stopped. You know my name. Orville tilted his head slightly. Building directory got updated last week. You're on the 42nd floor listing now, he paused. Word gets around. Dion wasn't sure what to say to that. Good thing you did, Orville said simply, and went back to his desk. Dion stood in the lobby for a moment. He looked at the space around him. The marble floors he had mopped, the elevator bank he had used 1,000 times from the service side. The seating area near the front windows where he had sat across from Raina 11 nights ago. Different from this angle. Everything was different from this angle. He took the elevator to the 48th floor and walked to Raina's office and knocked twice. Come in, she was at her desk, working. A deep burgundy folder open in front of her. Documents spread across the surface with the organized density of someone who had been at it since early morning. She looked up when he entered. He said, I'll take it. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she said, sit down. He sat. And they talked for 90 minutes about what the role would actually require. Not the title. Not the compensation, though that came up and was handled without drama. The function. The scope. the kind of internal architecture she wanted to build, and the reasoning behind each element. She spoke about it the way she spoke about everything, clearly and without decoration, as though the work itself was the most interesting thing in the room and didn't need anything added to it. He listened the way he had always listened to problems that mattered, all the way through, without forming his response before she finished, without looking for the place where his existing knowledge fit, just taking in what she was saying and letting the picture build. By the time he left her office, he had the shape of it in his head, and it was a problem worth solving. His last night shift was on a Thursday, he told Gerald 2 weeks before. Gerald received the news with the expression of a man moving through several distinct emotional states in rapid succession, confusion first, then a slow kind of comprehension, then something that settled into a look Dion couldn't immediately name and eventually decided was pride, though it seemed to embarrass Gerald slightly to be showing it. Same building, Gerald said, when Dion explained where the new position was. Same building. Gerald looked at him for a moment. You're going to run into people up there that you used to clean up after, I know. You all right with that? Dion thought about it honestly. Yeah, he said. I think I actually am. Gerald put out his hand. Dion shook it. That was that on his last shift he did the full rotation. Every floor on his assignment, every office. He worked the same way he had worked every night for 3 years, methodically, without ceremony. He didn't linger in the corridor on the 48th floor or treat the basement break room as a place that required a goodbye. He just did the work. And when it was done, he clocked out and signed the log and left through the service entrance for the last time. He didn't look back at the door. Looking back was not something he was going to make a habit of. He walked to his car in the early morning and sat in the driver's seat for a moment before starting the engine. The sky was just beginning to lighten at the edges, that particular quality of pre-dawn light that exists for about 20 minutes before it becomes something else. He had seen it hundreds of times from this parking structure, always at the end of something, always heading home. He sat in it for a moment. Then he started the engine and drove. His first day in the new role was the following Monday. He arrived at 8 in the morning, through the front entrance. Orville gave him a nod as he came through the glass doors, the same nod he gave anyone who came through regularly, which was a small thing and felt like the right kind of small thing. He was wearing the grey suit he had owned for 4 years and not worn in 3. It fit differently than he remembered. Not worse, just differently. Like clothing that had been waiting for the person wearing it to be ready for it. The office assigned to him was on the 42nd floor. Not large, a window facing the building across the street, a desk, a chair, a computer that had been set up and was waiting. He sat down, looked at the desk, looked at the screen, thought, this is either the most reasonable thing you've ever done or the beginning of a very expensive mistake. Then he opened the computer and started working, because if it was a mistake, it would still be a mistake in 20 minutes. And the work was in front of him right now. The first month was 2 things at once. It was familiar in the way that work you were built for is always familiar when you return to it. Not comfortable exactly, not easy, but recognizable, like a language coming back to your mouth after years of disuse. Present and ready in ways you had stopped expecting. 11 years of systems experience did not evaporate during 3 years of night shifts. It went dormant. And when he sat down in front of infrastructure with actual administrative access and the assignment of understanding what was happening inside a network at its deepest level, the knowledge was there. All of it. Waiting. He ran a full audit of Apex Shield's access control architecture in the first 2 weeks. Every permission level, every clearance designation, every automated alert threshold. He found 3 structural vulnerabilities that had nothing to do with Trevon Ashby and everything to do with a system that had been built for a company a quarter of Apex Shield's current size and never properly updated as the company grew. Silent gaps. The kind that don't announce themselves until someone who knows what to look for goes looking. He wrote it up, took it to Paulette Granger, the IT director, who had been with the company 8 years, and who received his report with the expression of someone who had suspected these problems existed, but hadn't had the capacity to name them. How long did this take you? She said. 12 days. She looked at the report again, at the scope of it. This would have taken my team 6 months to get to. Different vantage point, he said. I came in without assumptions about how things were supposed to work. I just looked at what was actually there. She looked at him over the top of the document. You're the one who was on the cleaning crew. He had expected this. He had a response prepared that was professional and non-defensive. What he actually said was, I was. Now I'm the person who found 3 access gaps in your perimeter architecture. Which conversation do you want to have? Paulette looked at him for a second. Then she laughed, short and genuine. The laugh of someone who appreciated directness because they practiced it themselves. Fair enough, she said. Sit down. He sat down, and they talked about the gaps. The team he was building was small by design. 4 people to start. He had been given latitude to hire from inside or outside, and had chosen a mix based on what the function actually required, rather than what looked right on an organizational chart. 2 people from Apex Shield's existing IT security staff. They knew the internal systems and had the institutional knowledge to contextualize anomalies, to know when something unusual was actually unusual versus when it was a known quirk of how the infrastructure had been patched together over years of rapid growth. 1 person from outside with a background in forensic accounting. Because money trails and data trails were the same kind of problem in different clothing, and anyone serious about internal integrity needed someone who could follow both. And 1 person he had not expected to hire until he found her. Her name was Jessamine Pruitt, 26 years old. She worked in the company's data analytics department on the 31st floor, where she had been for 2 years building models that tracked contract performance patterns across market segments. 3 months before the Ashby investigation broke, Jessamine had submitted an internal memo to her supervisor and the analytics department head. The memo noted unusual patterns in Apex Shield's contract loss rate over the preceding quarter. Specifically, the margin of similarity between Apex Shield's losing bids and Ridgecore's winning ones was, in her assessment, too consistent across too many separate contracts to reflect independent competitive development. She had recommended the pattern be reviewed by someone with access to the pricing model data. The department head told her she was reading noise as signal and to refocus on her assigned projects. She had not known where else to take it. Dion found the memo while reviewing pre-investigation documentation as part of his own structural audit. He read it once and understood immediately what he was looking at. Then he read it again to confirm he wasn't projecting. He wasn't. She had seen it. 3 months before any of it became visible to anyone else. She had looked at the data with fresh eyes and recognized a pattern that everyone with more context and more investment in the existing explanation had missed or dismissed. She had written it up and sent it through the proper channels and been told she was wrong. She hadn't stopped thinking it was right. He walked to the 31st floor on a Tuesday afternoon and found her at her desk. She was looking at something on her screen with the focused expression of someone working through a problem that hadn't resolved yet. You wrote the bid pattern memo, he said. She looked up. Yes, 3 months ago. Yes. Your department head told you the finding wasn't valid. He told me I was reading noise as signal. Were you? She looked at him steadily. No. Why didn't you escalate further? I sent it to my supervisor and to the department head. The department head closed it. I didn't have a channel above that for something that was still technically speculative. I had a pattern analysis and a recommendation. Without access to the pricing model data, I couldn't prove causation. She paused. I didn't know where else to send it. Dion nodded. Now you do. She looked at him for a moment. Who are you, Dion Lattimore? I run ethics and integrity operations. Something shifted in her expression. Recognition. You're the one who reported the log data. Yes, you were on the night cleaning crew. I was. She looked at her screen briefly, then back at him. How long have you been in the new role? 5 weeks, she absorbed this. And you're already building a team. I'm building the right team, he said. There's a difference. She was quiet for a moment. What would the role actually involve? Pattern recognition, anomaly flagging, internal audits of access behavior, collaboration with IT security on threshold calibration, and the kind of work you were already doing on your own time 3 months ago, except with the access and the authority to take it somewhere when you find something. She looked at him. You found something 3 months ago and nobody listened, he said. In my division, that doesn't happen. If you bring me a pattern that holds up under review, it gets reviewed. If it leads somewhere, we follow it. If it leads nowhere, we document why and move on. He paused. You'll have the channel you didn't have before, Jessamine was quiet for a moment longer. When would I start? She said. Next Monday. If you want it, it's Wednesday. Then you have 3 days to finish what you're working on. He turned to go, Mr. Lattimore. He stopped. The memo, she said. Was the pattern real? The bid margins? He turned back. Looked at her directly. You read it exactly right, he said. 3 months before anyone else got there. He paused. That's why I'm standing in front of you right now. He went back to his floor. She showed up Monday. The court proceedings began 6 weeks after the arrests. Dion was listed as a federal witness. He had known this was coming. Agent Dupree's office had told him in their final meeting that his formal statement would be part of the evidentiary record and that he would likely be called on the technical aspects of his initial observation. He was prepared for that. He was not prepared for the hallway. It happened on the second day of preliminary hearings. He had given his testimony that morning, clear and factual, the same way he had given it to Dupree in the field office 6 weeks earlier. He described what he had seen on the screen, the format of the logs, why the pattern was recognizable to someone with his background, what he had done with what he saw. No editorializing, no weight added. Just the sequence of events in the order they had occurred. He was walking out through the corridor of the federal courthouse in the early afternoon when he saw Trevon Ashby coming from the opposite direction, flanked by attorneys on both sides. A security officer 2 steps behind. The corridor was narrow. There was no redirect available. The distance between them closed at the pace of 2 groups of people walking toward each other with a destination on the other side. Dion kept his pace. Ashby's attorneys were talking among themselves. Something procedural. Ashby appeared to be listening. Then he looked up, and he saw Dion. The attorneys kept moving for 2 more steps before they noticed Ashby had stopped. Dion stopped too. They stood in the corridor looking at each other across maybe 8 feet of courthouse marble. 2 men who had never spoken, who had existed in the same building for 3 years without ever occupying the same space at the same time. 2 men who had both, at different points, stood at a line and made a choice about which direction to move. Different choices, same mechanism, different outcomes. Dion looked at Ashby's face and did not find what he had expected. He had expected the cold calculation of a man managing his exposure. He had seen that expression before in people under pressure. He knew its texture. That was not what was on Trevon Ashby's face. What was there was exhaustion. The deep, specific exhaustion of a person who has been holding up a version of themselves they chose over the real one and has finally, in the most public and irreversible way possible, put it down. Ashby's attorneys had gone quiet. Ashby looked at Dion, and then quietly, with nothing behind it except the weight of something he knew was past tense, he said, "I used to be a good man." Dion held his gaze. He thought about what to say. He had answers available, some honest, some kind, some that were neither. He considered each one briefly and left them all where they were. He said nothing, because nothing was the truest response, not cruelty, not absolution. Just the acknowledgement that some statements are complete on their own and don't require a reply to be real. The man across from him had said what he needed to say. What Dion did with it was his own private matter. He held Ashby's eyes for 1 more second. Then he walked. The sentence traveled with him, all the way to the parking structure, all the way onto the highway, back to his apartment, where he sat in the good chair by the window and stayed with it for the rest of the afternoon. I used to be a good man. Not I am a good man who made bad choices. Not I had reasons that made sense at the time. Not I'm sorry or please understand or here is the context. Just used to be past tense. Clean, specific. Like a man who knew exactly where the line had been because he had spent 15 months on the wrong side of it and learned the coordinates by memory. Dion thought about his own past tense, about the person he had been at Meridian, about the Tuesday night and the warning flag and the decision to go home, about the way he had constructed an entire story of deserved failure from that single moment and lived inside it for 3 years. But that person, the one on that Tuesday night, had flagged the risk in writing, twice. He had seen the wrong thing and named it. He had been overruled and gone home depleted, which was a human response to an impossible situation, not a moral failure. The failure had not been his. The failure had been a system that didn't protect the people who worked inside it when they were running on empty and needed someone to catch what they couldn't hold. He had been punishing himself for a failure that wasn't his to carry for 3 years. He sat in the chair and let that be true without qualifying it. without adding yes, but, or except, or to be fair, just letting it be exactly what it was. Then he got up and made dinner, because some realizations don't require anything dramatic after them. Sometimes the thing that changes you just quietly becomes part of what you know. And then you make dinner and go to bed and wake up the next morning carrying yourself slightly differently, and that is enough. That is in fact everything. 1 year. 12 months from the night of the 48th floor. 12 months from the cartwheels and the half-lit corridor and the screen angled toward the door. 12 months from a camera click in a quiet office and a call at 2:30 in the morning and a federal report filed from a basement break room. 12 months from 4 minutes. Apex Shield held its annual company-wide address on a Thursday morning in November, the main auditorium on the ground floor. Every employee in the building, engineers and analysts and attorneys, and the finance team, and the sales floor and IT security and reception, and the building security staff and the custodial crew who came in every night after everyone else had left to make sure the place was ready for the next day. All of them, Dion, sat in the 4th row. The suit was charcoal, bought 3 weeks earlier, with a weight to the fabric that was new enough to still feel slightly foreign when he moved in it. He had arrived early and chosen the seat himself, and when people filtered in around him, they settled into the auditorium with the particular looseness of a group of people who had been through something difficult together and come out the other side of it still standing. Broderick was in the 7th row. He had driven down from Washington the night before. They had eaten dinner at the diner 2 blocks from the building, the one Dion now went to without thinking about it, and talked for 2 hours about things that were not the company, and not the past year, and not the investigation. About Broderick's work in Washington, which was going well. About Dion's team on the 42nd floor, which was taking shape faster than he had expected. About the way time moves differently when you're doing work that requires all of you versus work that requires only your body. It was the best conversation Dion had in a long time. Raina walked onto the stage at 9 a.m. No notes, the auditorium quieted immediately. Not the enforced quiet of a corporate event. The natural quiet of attention moving in one direction. She was wearing a dress the deep color of midnight blue, simple in line, precise in the way her clothing always was. Hair pulled back, the way it had been on the night he first saw her face clearly in that chair in the dark office. Except tonight there was no pretending. She was entirely present, entirely visible, entirely herself in the way that some people manage to be when they have stopped needing to perform composure and have arrived at the actual thing. She stood at the front of the stage and looked at the room for a moment before she spoke, not gathering herself, seeing them, all of them. 12 months ago, she said, I sat in my office at 2 in the morning and pretended to sleep. The auditorium held very still. I had been building this company for 19 years by then. I had started it in a rented room in Baltimore with a second-hand server and the conviction that what I was building mattered. I had kept it going through every hard year, every contract we lost before we learned how to win. Every investor who looked at me like I was in the wrong room. She paused. I had done all of that, and I was sitting in that office at 2 in the morning, unable to trust a single person around me. Nobody moved, so I did something desperate, she said. I set the access logs running on my monitor, and I angled the screen toward the door, and I closed my eyes, and I waited to see what the people in my building did when they thought I wasn't looking. What people do when there's no audience. She let that settle. It was not my best leadership moment. I want to be honest about that. Testing people without their knowledge is not a strategy. It's what you do when you've run out of everything else. A small sound moved through the room. Recognition. But I did it, she said, because I had spent 14 months watching everything I built come apart, and I needed to know whether any part of it was still real. She looked across the faces in front of her. The person who came through that door was not someone I had ever sat across a table from, not someone whose name I knew or whose face I would have recognized in an elevator. He was the man who cleaned my office, 3 years of night shifts. 1,000 hours in this building, making sure the space the rest of us worked in was clean and functional and ready. Moving through these floors every night like he didn't exist. The room was silent in the way. Silence becomes something physical you can feel. He had 11 years of network security experience before life took him somewhere he hadn't planned to go. When he walked into my office that night and saw what was on my screen, He understood it immediately. He knew exactly what he was looking at. She paused. He photographed the evidence. He contacted someone he trusted. He filed a federal report. He put his own name on it, knowing what that could cost him. His job, his stability, everything he had rebuilt in 3 years. She looked down for a moment. Then back up. He did all of that, she said, for a company he had no stake in. For a CEO who didn't know his name. The room was very quiet. I spent 19 years building something and believing that the people who mattered most were the ones with the largest formal stake in it. The board members, the executives, the major clients, the investors in the rooms where the decisions were made. She stopped. I was wrong. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The room was already entirely with her. The person who saved this company was not in any of those rooms. He was not on any org chart I had ever looked at. He had no performance review tied to our survival. He had a cleaning cart and a telephone and the kind of integrity that doesn't wait for an audience before deciding to show up. She paused. And he woke me up. Not from sleep. From the way of seeing that I had built into myself over 19 years without realizing it. The habit of looking at this building and only really seeing the people who appeared on the slides I presented to investors. She looked across the auditorium. His name is Dion Lattimore, she said. He leads our ethics and integrity operations division now, and the reason I asked him to take that role has nothing to do with what he found on that screen. It has everything to do with what he chose to do with it. When the easier path was directly in front of him, when walking away would have cost him nothing, when every calculation said this is not your problem, she let that breathe. He chose differently, and this company is standing here today because of that choice. She looked at the fourth row, at him. What he showed me, she said, is that the infrastructure that never fails isn't the kind you build into servers. It's the kind you build into people, and you build it by seeing the people in front of you, all of them. Not just the ones in the rooms you were already looking at. The auditorium was quiet for a long moment after she finished. Then it wasn't. The sound that came was not the polished applause of a managed corporate event. It was something rougher and more honest. People clapping who meant it. People who had spent a year watching something they were part of nearly disappear and had come through the other side of it with a clearer understanding of what it was they actually valued about being here. Dion did not stand. He didn't wave or acknowledge the room with any gesture that said, "Look at me." He sat in the fourth row with his hands resting on his knees and looked at the woman on the stage who had once been asleep in a chair while he mopped her floor. He thought about night 1094. He thought about the cartwheels on the marble and the dimmed lights and the screen angled toward the door, and the moment when his brain had read the pattern before his better judgment could suggest it wasn't his business. He thought about the basement break room and the metal bench and the bad coffee and the phone in his hands and the 4-year gap in his contacts that he had crossed in the dark. He thought about Broderick answering on the 4th ring. He thought about the camera click and the 4 minutes and the yellow tab at page 47. He thought about Jessamine Pruitt on the 31st floor, who had written a memo 3 months before any of it came apart and filed it through proper channels and been told she was reading noise as signal. Who was sitting somewhere in this auditorium right now, 4 months into the team he was building, already working at a level that made it clear she had been waiting for someone to give her the right room and the right authority, and had only ever needed that one thing. He thought about Gerald shaking his hand in the facilities office. About Orville at the front desk saying good thing with the straightforward economy of a man who didn't waste words on things that didn't require them. He thought about Trevon Ashby in the courthouse corridor saying, "I used to be a good man with nothing behind it, but the weight of knowing it was past tense and accurate." He thought about his apartment ceiling, the same ceiling he had looked at on hundreds of mornings after night shifts, deciding, without quite naming it as a decision, to make his life smaller, to make himself smaller, to count shift numbers instead of things that mattered. He had stopped counting shift numbers. He had started counting other things. The gaps he had found in the first 2 weeks. The conversations with Paulette. The Monday that Jessamine showed up on the 42nd floor with her laptop bag and a look that said she was ready to work and had been for a long time. The morning he walked into the building through the front entrance and Orville nodded at him the same way. He nodded at everyone who came through regularly, Small things, but the right ones. After the auditorium cleared, Dion stayed in his seat for a few minutes. People moved around him on their way out, voices rising with the energy of an ordinary Thursday returning to itself. The sound of a building resuming. Broderick appeared at the end of the row. He stood with his hands in his pockets and looked at Dion the way people look at something they've waited a specific amount of time to see and are glad to find it is what they hoped. Dion stood. "You good," Broderick said. Dion considered it honestly, not the reflex answer, the true one. He thought about the office on the 42nd floor, the window facing the building across the street, the team taking shape around work that required all of him. The audit report on Paulette's desk with his name on the cover. The problem that was in front of him every morning when he sat down at the desk that had been set up and waiting. He thought about walking through the front entrance of this building like it was the only entrance there was, because it was. "Yeah," he said. "I'm good." Broderick nodded once, like that was exactly what he had driven down from Washington to hear. They walked out together through the lobby, past Orville's desk, where Orville raised a hand as they passed with the same economy he applied to everything. Through the glass doors and into the November morning, cold and clear. The city doing what it always did, which was exist without waiting for anyone inside it to be ready. Dion stood on the sidewalk, looked up at the building, 48 floors. Glass and steel, and the way morning light moved differently across a surface that tall. Like the building was doing something small and private with the light before giving it back to the street. He had looked at this building from the outside before, hundreds of times. Always from the direction of the service entrance on the east side, always approaching it as the man who disappeared inside before anyone else arrived. This was different. He stood on the sidewalk in the November cold and looked at the building he used to clean and now worked inside in a way that required him to be the complete version of himself. Not the edited version. Not the version that had decided the safest size for a life was small. The full one. He had been that person at 2:30 in the morning in a dark office with a cleaning cart and a phone and no audience. He had been that person in a basement break room filing a report that put his name on a federal record. He had been that person in a courthouse corridor, saying nothing back to a man who had said all there was to say. He had been that person the whole time. He had just stopped recognizing him. Broderick waited a few feet back, not saying anything, just giving him the moment. Dion stood there for about 30 seconds. Then he turned and walked back through the front doors of the building, into the work that was waiting, into the morning that was already moving, into the life that was finally the right size.